to go through a couple of slides real quick about some
Okay.
Zoom etiquette and welcoming, and then we'll pass it over to you if that sounds good.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thanks for arriving with us. So welcome everybody for this year's Conservation Summit. Caring for the Land is our theme this year. Thank you so much for joining us today. First things first, a little bit of housekeeping. Please check to make sure that your microphone is on mute during the presentation and turn off your cameras. But during the question and answers at the end, it would be great to see your faces. So please turn your cameras back on, and you can write questions during the presentation in the chat, which you can find at the bottom of your little Zoom window. And the moderator will incorporate them into the Q&A at the end. And there will also be an opportunity to ask your questions directly by unmuting your mic, and you'll be called upon for doing that. Great, next slide. A little bit about us, the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions. Our mission is to support Vermont Conservation Commissions and to empower the creation of new conservation commissions across Vermont. In addition to our annual summit, we have a 600+ member listserv, a tiny grants program, and a library of conservation success stories. These stories cover a huge range of conservation commission successes, from organizing a green up day to changing town zonings. Be sure to read these great stories on our website, and please submit your own stories so that we can read about the good work your conservation commission is engaging in, and it can inspire other conservation commissions. We want to give a big thank to our sponsors, Front Porch Forum, Hunger Mountain Co-op, the Nature Conservancy, and Vermont Land Trust, and also the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. Great. So this year's theme for the summit is Caring for the Land. Today we'll be hearing from Judy Dow and the presentation of Going Through the Narrows. A little bit about our session today. Welcome. This is the opening session. We chose this theme because we wanted to highlight some of the growth that has been happening in the conservation world. There's a shift to more inclusive perspectives of what land protection, connection, and care can look like. And there's more space to celebrate voices that have historically been excluded from conservation. And through this theme, there's a desire to consider and balance the many ways communities engage with the land. Through our series this year, we hope that you will walk away with insight into new perspectives, ideas for the future of your town's conservation work, and practical knowledge that you can apply to your land practices. Today's presentation, Going Through the Narrows, is presented by Judy Dow. Judy, thank you so much for being here today. For 35 years, Judy has been a visionary mentor, braiding into all of her educational work core concepts of the Wabanaki people of New England: respect, reciprocity, relationships, responsibility, reverence. Judy was the recipient of the Vermont Governor's Heritage Award for Outstanding Educator in 2004. She has taught students from pre-K to university and worked in community settings, reservations, prisons, and assisted living centers. Over the past few years, she has taught in Hawaii, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, Quebec, California, Illinois, and many other places. Her current focus is reclaiming historical Indigenous stories and mapping these stories to provide youth with another perspective of history, science, and math. These tools will assist them in making meaning of their own lives. Judy is currently the executive director for Gidakina, a Native organization that works with women and their families throughout New England to help them to self-determine a good path in life. Thanks so much for being here today, Judy, and I'll pass it over to you for Going Through the Narrows. Oh, you're on mute, Judy.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. I just spent the morning at a climate change council meeting, and I need to say some things after that meeting. So it's great that you're here so I can bounce things off from you. I have a prepared paper, and hopefully we have time at the end for questions. Story work comes from a long time ago when this land was young. Story work has a purpose. It's the oral transmission of language, of knowledge about the land, her science, history, and people. The reason for story work is so all future generations learn the past in an effort to understand the present so they can direct the future in a good way. Storytelling is the Native Americans' traditional educational tool. It's a way not to repeat events from the past that did not work and build on others that did work. There is not one place in Ndakina, our land, where there is not a story to be told about the land. The land has memory, a story that does not perpetuate myths, that is, especially the myth around environmental injustices. Education has been placed into silos for centuries now. We must begin to use story to create a more holistic way of living with the land. As we have discovered over the past 400 plus years, silos don't work. Thinking differently during this climate crisis is critical. We must think out of the box. From the forest in the rolling mountains and hills where I stand, the glacial till I see scattered about, and the river and wetlands nearby me that store the carbon, to the sand dunes of Lake Champlain and the red stone quarries in Burlington, this land tells me the story of change over millions and millions of years. The land in our stories tell those living here about adaptation to changes over time, adaptation for the purpose of survival. Relationships with the land has been in existence since before people first walked into this land. These relationships are the root of Mother Earth's story. These stories are about kin and their relationship. Learning to read the land and understand the changes are a part of story work. We are taught as the Abenaki children, and we pass on to our children. The stories must be told for the people, by the people, if they are to respect the land and preserve her for future generations. It is Indigenous philosophy to use the layers and metaphors in our stories for education, community, and individuality, braiding together these spiritual kinships of people and the land. Story work has a purpose to teach respect, responsibility, reciprocity, reverence, and relationships, all of which is directly connected to understanding place and the social injustices created by presenting a single story. The synergy of these 5 principles is what develops the lessons to be taught. Whether it's about nature or Mother Earth herself, these basic principles have empowered our Indigenous right of being on the land throughout many generations. If we continue following these principles, we will ensure that the land and human relationship will continue for many generations forward. This will allow all future generations to continue to develop a sense of place and pride in their work and relationship with kin while conserving what future generations need. Perpetuating and turning a blind eye to greenwashing does not create awareness or sustainability. It creates disruption and destruction. Caring for the land today needs vigilance and looking at the world in a holistic way. For example, using electric cars are good for the environment, but there's always a but, right? Where does the electricity come from? In the case of Vermont, Hydro-Quebec. Looking holistic, one will see that 11 First Nations were severely impacted by the creation of this dam. Many of the tribes were moved, others lost most of their land to flooding, and some live right next to the dam and still don't even have electricity. Mercury in the land was released, and people now pay at least $17 for a liter of drinking water. Fishing is no longer a lifeway for providing food for these people. They are now full of mercury. The diversity of plants has been lost due to the flooding. Indigenous peoples are the caretakers of the world's biodiversity, and they care for an estimated 25% of the Earth's land surface. This land coincides with 80% of the plant's biodiversity and about 40% of all terrestrial protected areas, ecologically intact landscapes. Indigenous people matter. Indigenous peoples are the caretakers of the world's biodiversity and cultural diversity. Although electric cars will reduce the use of fossil fuels, where is the equity in using them when you consider what's happening globally? We must look at the global picture when looking at a holistic and equitable way of solving our climate crisis. The use of solar panels are the same. Marginalized people could never afford to buy these panels. Most don't even have electricity, and this is only half the story. The heavy metal in these panels that may be classified as hazardous material are often harvested by children in China or off Native American reservations. Once again, the poor and the whole, whose voices are seldom heard, are the ones hurt by this. We must look for sustainable ways to make these alternatives for everyone. We must learn to question, does the practice support reducing energy? Can the practice contribute to lessening man-made waste? Does the practice reduce destruction of natural environment? And is there fairness to all living things, both human and non-human? For instance, the water. However, I'm now concerned. Things are changing and people are not prepared for what is coming. Over many generations, we have been given 7 prophecies called the 7 fires. But elders believe we're in the 7th fire today. It has been predicted that as we enter the 7th fire, we will meet a fork in the road. One path will lead us to the coming together of all peoples, and it will be green and lush. The other path will be burnt and dark. This coming together will bring us back to the way of life when the earth and humans were young. Most have understood the 5 principles since the beginning of time, but some people have forgotten and don't even care. Greed and profit control their words and their actions. They don't understand the difference between a want and a need anymore. They will lead us down the 2nd path of destruction. So now we are going through the narrows. We have a path to choose. Going through the narrows is a journey, one in which we will be traveling from a world we know intimately, a world where there is a limited amount of people, plants, birds, fish, and other beings. We are traveling from a world through the narrows into a world where all systems as we know them will be broken. There will be much pain and suffering as we travel on this journey. We must help each other, work together to make it through the new world. We've grown up understanding the sun rises every morning and sets every night at a predictable time. We've learned to read the seasons and the land. Abenaki have no word for time. When everyone is together and everything is ready, and only then is it time. We've learned to live with these predictable events along with many other natural events we experience day to day. Many of us have become at peace with the world we live in, assuming this is the way it will always be. Some people have grown up never getting intimately involved in the world around them unless they are directly impacted by a catastrophe. While we're ignoring the bigger picture, Gidakina, our world, has changed. We are beginning the passage from a world we now know through the narrows into a new world. A different world than we could ever imagine, not like one we read about in history books. Life will be different. It will be difficult at best for some and unbearable for others, and costly in so many ways for everyone. The land management practices of the past have been forgotten. In their place stands greed, profit, and power. In many places, our traditional ecological knowledge is just thought of as a quaint practice from long ago. Some very loud scientists today believe they know better than the Native American scientists from the past. They have forgotten that traditional ecological knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation from the beginning of time. This knowledge is tried and true. I don't mean to be the voice of doom. I simply want people to wake up. The Narrows are here, and we need to teach all children how to cross them if they are to survive. My ancestors learned that it was traditional to adapt to changing times, and that adaptation is traditional. They show this in their very actions and their survival. The old songs, stories, pictographs, and prayers are the maps for us to follow today. They tell a story of the land, adapting to changes that were political, environmental, economic, and social in nature. This was the key to their survival. Some Native American children have forgotten how to adapt to changing times, or were simply not taught because their parents didn't know. Hence, our children don't understand that if they do not adapt to change, change will simply pass them by. Crossing the Narrows will be painful for all. Children are like little sponges soaking up knowledge. If we choose not to share the old stories and the old ways, our youth will struggle needlessly. Many will not survive the journey through the Narrows. All children must learn that it is their responsibility to ask questions and seek out alternative ways of learning. It is the responsibility of the adults to share the knowledge they have acquired from those that came before us. Our children need to grow up as I did, knowing that the land is the book of life, the land is the written language. They must learn to read the land and understand her language and their relationship with Mother Earth. They must know how they and the 5 principles are connected to the land if they are to survive the journey through the Narrows. The strands of life must be reclaimed and shared as a story that comes from many voices and doesn't ignore historical trauma or place the land and her peoples into silos. They are tools and values we must use to create survival for our future generations. So I just want to make sure I kind of want to explain again what I mean by going through the Narrows, because it's a metaphor, and a lot of the children I work with are so disconnected from the land, they don't know the term Narrows. So a narrow is a small place in land, and I grew up in South Euro, and I used to take my little sailboat paddle all over the place, and the mainland and the islands had narrows, that went small narrow spots in between them. And it was a place of making decision. When you hit the Narrows, the water begins to change. If it's calm on one side, you can begin to feel the roughness in the middle of the Narrows. And when you get to the other side, you clearly see the broad lake and the rough waves. So the Narrows are the point in time where you have to make a decision. Do you turn back or do you go forward? And many can't make it through the Narrows. It's just too difficult. So you need to be able to be in a position to help others. If we don't, the only ones who make make it through the Narrows are those who can purchase their passage through. In other words, the wealthy. So that's a lot to say. Anybody have a question? Can we have a conversation?
Folks, you are welcome to take yourself off mute. It would be great under if you use the hand function under reactions on the Zoom screen. You can raise a hand, but you can also just take yourself off mute.
Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation.
Please, Laurel.
Sorry, get my mic in place. I would love to hear you say more about the 5 guides, or I can't remember what you called them, respect, responsibility, and so on.
Yeah. So as a child, I was raised with respect, relationships, responsibility, reference, and reciprocity. And many Northeastern people use those same values to teach their children. And it's something we've been drifting away from immensely. Children don't understand they have to develop a relationship with the land. They don't recognize blueberries. They don't recognize where the milk comes from. Sometimes even they're very distant in many cases from that direct connection to the land. And when I give walks with the kids out in the woods, often they'll say to me, I can't go there. My mother doesn't let me go in the woods because that's where the druggies are. And so you have to squelch these fears that they have to even get into the forest. And it's these fears when they grow up that they want to get rid of. And so that's why the values are so important. You have to first develop a relationship. And with that relationship of understanding where your food comes from, then you grow respect. If I'm not good to this land, if I'm not careful of this land, I don't have food. And so you develop respect. And then you begin to understand it's your responsibility to care for this land, because this land will only care for you if you care for it. And so then you have reverence and reciprocity. So I think that does that help you? Does that answer that giving back and the respect, reciprocity? Does that answer the questions that you have? Yeah, Laura.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Marguerite was asking, how do you encourage and teach children to ask these questions?
Well, see, that's the thing. If they don't ask, the elders forget and they don't even bother to offer sometime. So I think my style of learning is exploration, experience, and observation. And with the opportunities for exploring and experiencing and observation, questions come naturally. But if we limit the opportunities that kids have to experience and explore, we limit the questions. And adults forget, they don't think it's important to say these things. And so consequently, they don't.
My experience as a parent is, we went through the why phase with my kids, where, everything was why and what, and there were lots and lots of questions. And it's been interesting to see as they've gotten older, the number of questions drop. And I'm concerned about that and what I've done to limit those questions. I mean, it was exhausting, and yet, now I miss it.
Well, I totally understand what you're saying. And I'm 67 years old, and my husband says I drive him nuts with the why questions. We have never been TV watchers, but lately we feel it's mindless entertainment for the moment to get rid of the world around us. And I'm constantly asking, why did they do that? What's that all about? And my husband's like, please. But yes, we have to encourage those why questions. We have to give them opportunities to come up with them, to see them. Provide them with opportunities. I can remember my father explaining something and my sister saying, yeah, I know. My father said, oh, you know? Okay. And he never said another word about it. And she really didn't know. It was a statement she just automatically said, acknowledging what he was saying. And that's the thing we have to do. They don't know. They may think they know, but they don't. So we have to provide an opportunity to show them what they don't know so that they can consequently ask questions.
Okay. Folks, you should feel free to jump in on this conversation. We'd love to have you. Christine writes, as Conservation Commission members, what recommendation do you have for how we can use our roles in town government to help apply some of the principles that you discussed today?
Well, I think you probably got on these roles because you have some knowledge about conservation. And at least I would hope that's why you got these roles. And I would think that taking that knowledge you have and offering to share it at schools, at Rotary meetings, wherever, would be critical. And I would feel that that's your responsibility to do that. Because what good is it going to do to have all this knowledge and sit on it and do nothing with it?
Thanks. Also, you mentioned earlier that you participated in a climate council meeting this morning. Christine's asking if you have takeaways there that you could share with us on that process.
Yeah, so I serve on the Ag and Ecosystems Committee, and Abenaki people most Native nations do not have a word for time. When everybody's together and everything's ready, it's time. And so like think about trying to do maple syrup collection or sap collection and create maple syrup in September. It just doesn't work because it's not time, right? And so when everybody's together, everything's ready, it's time. And time is this major problem for these committees. The legislation created this time schedule that is virtually impossible to complete. And so now that we're getting in the last stretch, time is a stumbling block because we don't have time to look at all the suggestions we had. We don't have time to edit things. Everything's due on Friday and we have over 100 suggestions. So the issue then becomes, how do we crunch this into something that we can submit to the full council and legislate and the legislation when it's an incomplete thought? So my biggest stumbling block is time. My other stumbling block is they wanted to know about traditional ecological knowledge. I explained and did whole PowerPoints and talked about equity and the importance of all of that. And when it comes down to crunch, they still want to stay in their silos. And for the last 400 and some odd years, the silos that they were using, the academic silos, have gotten us into the problems we're in. They need to take a more holistic process because for tens of thousands of years, it worked fine. And they're not confident enough to look at this traditional ecological knowledge as something that they should take a gamble on. Although many times they write a scientific paper as if they've just discovered something, and it really was ancient traditional ecological knowledge. And I never miss an opportunity to tell them that. So that's my stumbling blocks mostly.
Judy, we've known about climate change since the 70s, and I think early on in the climate, in discussions of climate, the science community thought, well, we'll show our graphs, and any rational person will identify that upward trend in greenhouse gases, and clearly everyone will change their minds, and that hasn't worked. are there other ways that we can use story or these other principles you've talked about to bring climate awareness?
Oh, I think so. So I lived in Burlington from Columbus Day weekend to April vacation from school. From April vacation to Columbus Day weekend, I traveled to South Hero, and I lived on a dirt dead-end road with all my aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. And in the wintertime, we would have family gatherings there, and we would skate from Burlington to our home in South Hero. And sometime around the 70s, you couldn't do that anymore. And it's those stories that we have that is a clear indication something's gone awry. The lake is not freezing enough to skate from Malice Bay to South Hero. Come on, there's something wrong if that can't happen. And every fisherman and farmer you talk to have stories. And I think those stories are so concrete, they have to be told. People have to hear them. Children have to hear them. There's like this blasé attitude where there's no urgency in what's going to happen. And we have to introduce to people, there is a sense of urgency.
Linda, I see you're off mute. Did you want to get in on this conversation?
Let's see. Whoops. Judy, I was going to ask you, when you gave the examples of electric cars and solar panels, you followed up by saying there are questions we should be asking whenever we're faced with decisions about possible routes. Could you review those questions?
So those questions I use with 3rd and 4th graders. And I presented them to the Climate Council to ask them to become part of the guiding principles. And you would have thought I'd shot them in the foot, because they're like, oh, nobody's going to understand this. I'm like, I use it with 3rd and 4th graders. Here they are. We must learn to question, does the practice support reducing energy use? Can the practice contribute to lessening man-made waste? Does the practice reduce destruction of natural environments? And is there fairness to all living things, either human or non-human? Which brings you to think about a tree and cutting down the tree and the role the tree has in storing carbon, or the destruction of the water, and how wastewater treatment facilities just, when it rains, they just pull the plug and let it run into our drinking water. So there's all those things that have to be taken into consideration. And so if you look at a practice within your community and ask those 4 questions, you can quickly determine whether the process is sustainable or not. Because in most places, if a practice is sustainable, they're making money. And that's not the question we want to focus on. Are they sustainable within the environment?
Judy, would you just repeat those questions one more time? We just wanted to catch them one more time, please.
Yeah. I write them in, but I can't talk and write at the same time. Does the practice support reducing energy use? Can the practice contribute to lessening man-made waste? Does the practice reduce destruction of natural environment? Is there fairness to all living things, human and non-human? See, that's the problem. When people have gotten away from recognizing water as a living entity, they didn't have any problems with dumping their sewer in it. Yeah.
Other thoughts,
Rebecca,
comments, questions? Yeah.
Rebecca, that's it exactly. Thank you.
I'd like to, if I'm happy for others to jump in, but I'm just would like to pick up on this idea of story. And I do a lot of presentations with groups of all sizes, and I want to move more of what I talk about to story. And I'm actually sort of struggling to do that because your example of a climate change story was so perfect. I feel like I don't have enough of that knowledge to offer those sorts of simple, elegant stories. Do you have advice for a budding storyteller on how I can move in that direction?
Well, I guess I'm a meme, I'm a grandmother. So maybe that's why I'm a storyteller. But our stories are not lateral. They're not beginning, middle, and end. Our stories are cyclical. They go round and round and round and end up back at the beginning. So if you think of the story as a circle, and well, when my grandfather did XYZ, this happened. When I did XYZ, that happened. And what do you think is going to happen when you do XYZ? So think of it as a cyclical thing, because that's really what it is, right? It's going to go round and round and round. Does that help?
Yes, thanks. I think I'm going to need to really wrestle with what that means and how I can apply it. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I told I can't think of his name, Mark Nelson, that I have another program to go to, and so it's going to have to leave about 1:15. But I really want to mention that what I hope to do is get on the calls with you to listen to all the other speakers. And then at the very end, if you look at the agenda that was presented, it said I was talking again. What I'd really like to do is take all the comments the presenters make throughout this whole series and see how we can pull them together into a story, see how we can make them a story that will help people to go through the narrows. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Judy, this, as Ginger just wrote in, this has been very helpful and illuminating. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you over the next presentations and then at the keynote at the end. So we'll be back next week, 1 week from today at noon, and we're really excited to have you all here. And Judy, again, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.